a pleasure as we continue our series, like I said earlier, going through the Gospel of Mark, to go through this with you. I think it's been such a fun journey so far for those who have been along, getting to just walk with Jesus story after story, seeing how he treated people, seeing how he challenged their preconceived notions, and we're going to see a lot more of that today. So today I wanted to start off a little differently than normal. I'm going to start off with a little bit of an exercise. Not physical exercise, don't worry. Although with how chilly it is in here, that actually might be a good thing. No, there's a little thought exercise. You don't have to say anything out loud. But I want you to think in your head. You don't have to close your eyes unless you want to. What comes to your head when you hear these things? What's kind of the image that you see? Okay. Think of firefighter. Okay. Maybe you're thinking of kind of a generic firefighter, maybe a specific one you know. Okay. Now think of what comes in your head when you hear grandmother. Okay. Accountant. What do you picture there? How about a football player? Okay. Probably a pretty different image than accountant. What about environmentalist? Okay. Picture there. What about Christian? I think everyone got a little uncomfortable. Everyone's saying, I don't want to think the wrong thing. Right? This is a trap. Don't do it. No, there's no wrong answer here. The truth is that we all have images that come to our mind, associations. And so when we hear these words, we have a picture generally of what they look like. Like I said, they can be specific people in our lives that we've encountered or seen, or they can be kind of general composites. But typically when we think of even something like Christian, we are informed by the people we've experienced, the people we've seen as Christians. And so today what we're going to be looking at is the people of Jesus' day had a picture for what a good, faithful follower of God looked like. Jesus is going to challenge that a little bit. And so that's what I'm excited to jump in with you today. We're going to look at two separate encounters of Jesus where people approach him, and we're going to see how those go. So starting off here, we're in Mark chapter 7 today. So starting at verse 24. And from there, last week we talked about Jesus teaching his disciples about stains on our hearts. So that's where he's leaving from. From there, he arose and went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. All right, so he leaves this region. He's going to a far-off area, a little bit farther away from kind of the Jewish center. And he's entering this house, and Jesus doesn't want anyone to know he's going to be there. But word gets out, even before Twitter, word spreads. Paparazzi are going to paparazzi here. And so people find out where he is, where he gets around, and then this woman approaches in verse 25. But immediately, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. So word gets to this woman, and she's a mom, and she has a daughter who is possessed by this demon. She's haunted, she is tormented, and so this woman comes to Jesus, and we're going to learn more about her. Specifically, now the woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. So this woman approaches. First off, it's not proper etiquette for anyone just to throw themselves at a rabbi. And in this time and place, especially a woman wouldn't just throw herself at a holy man and beg him like this. She's a Gentile, which means she's a non-Jewish person. Okay, so he's a Jewish rabbi. She's not Jewish. And she's a Syrophoenician, so she's not even ethnically in the same grouping as Jesus is coming from. So she is culturally, ethnically, religiously different than Jesus. She is not somebody who would come up to a rabbi. But as most parents can attest, when you are a parent and you have something wrong with a kid, you are desperate. Right? You're willing to throw out everything to try and help your child that you love. And so this woman comes and she begs Jesus to take this demon out of her daughter. She comes to him, throws herself down, and she's asking him, can you please help my daughter? Again, to most of Jesus' followers, most religious leaders, they would have looked at this and said, like, oh my gosh, this is a holy man. Can you back away? Right? He's trying to do his thing. He didn't even want you to be here. He was trying to keep the word, He didn't want people to know. But she's so desperate, she comes to him and she begs him. And Jesus here has a very interesting response. And he said to her, let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. That doesn't sound like Jesus. I'll set some context here. So children, who are the children? They're the children of Israel. They are the Jewish people today. They're God's people, his chosen nation that he established, that he has blessed. He sent them kings. He provided for them. He led them out of exile. I mean, he's done all these things. These are the people. This is why Jesus says at one point, when you think of the parable of the lost sheep, right? The lost sheep are the lost sheep of Israel that he's trying to find. These people that God loved that have wandered. And so he's saying, I came for them first, right? He's a Jewish Messiah. And he actually is even comparing this woman to a dog in this analogy. It's a bit of a parable. But typically, outside of the Jewish faith, people were considered unclean. They were a different status. And so he's playing along with this. He's actually calling out, right, what everyone would see. I'm a Jewish Messiah. I'm here for the people of Israel. And I need to feed the children. And it's not right to take this gift, this blessing, this healing that's for them, and to give it to somebody else. Now the woman, remarkably, now just imagine if you had this holy man, right, that you heard of, and you're desperate to help your child, and you said, hey, can you please heal my daughter? And the holy man was just like, hey, I came for somebody else. I mean, it wouldn't be right. I'm here for them. I'm not really here for you right now. This is all setting this up, but this is what the woman's response is, because it's not what we would respond with. We would be offended. We would be taken aback. And yet she answers him, yes, Lord. She confirms what he says. I understand. I agree. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. So she says, hey, I realize I'm not a Jew. I'm not part of your people Israel. And I realize that I'm not one of the children. And yet, with this analogy, even the dogs get the crumbs. I'm just asking for whatever you can give me. Please help me. And then Jesus says to her, for this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter. And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. I mean, just what a remarkable moment of humility. She was compared to a dog in this analogy, and I don't think it's quite adequate to say that's a straight-up insult. Again, he's kind of playing with the cultural kind of analogies of the day, and yet at the same time, she doesn't challenge it. She doesn't demand, like, I'm just as good as them, and you should give me what I want. She just says, Lord, that's true. I realize that. And yet if you could just help me too. And so she demonstrates faith in a way that so many of Jesus' disciples haven't even figured out at this point, right? They're still trying to figure out, at times they lack faith. This woman comes up and she doesn't come demanding. She doesn't come up with any sort of rights. She just says, can you please help me? And we see here that faith calls us not to demand anything from God on our own account, while also trusting that he is caring for us. In terms of God, you have zero rights. You have a right to nothing in God's economy. Everything is a gift. We can't demand anything of him. We can't force him to do anything. And yet at the same time, faith also trusts him when he says that he is for us. This woman realizes what Jesus is saying is that there's a bit of an order. Jesus came first for the people of Israel, but it's going to be for all people. And so she says, I don't need what the people of Israel are getting, but I just want the crumbs. I'll take anything from you. Trusting that he is good. And so there's this tension here of not demanding anything from God. We come nothing as just beggars. We just come asking God, will you please give us this to us? And yet at the same time, not so self-absorbed in ourselves to negate the fact that God does promise to give. He does promise to care. And so this woman demonstrating faith that we haven't even seen in the book of Mark yet finds healing for her daughter. This demon is gone, and she gets those crumbs, and she gets more than just that. So this is one case. This is the first encounter, the first approach. This woman, ethnically, religiously, culturally different, approaches Jesus, and in demonstrating faith brings healing to her daughter. We're going to see one other person who comes to Jesus. So after this, verse 31, then he returned from the region of Tyre and went through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of Decapolis. All right, so he leaves that area. He starts to go back to Galilee, where he's kind of home based at. And then he continues, and they, presumably the crowds, the people in that area, they brought to him a man who was deaf and had a speech impediment. And they begged him to lay his hands on him. All right, so they bring him this guy, right? They've heard of this miracle worker, this teacher. And they have this guy who is deaf, and so because he can't hear, many people know if you can't hear your whole life, it's hard to talk as we would talk as fluently. So much of speech is learned audibly, and so he's deaf and he has a speech impediment. So again, he's not much function in this world. They don't have American Sign Language in Jesus' day. They don't have a way to communicate in the same way. And so this man is in desperate need. They bring him and they beg Jesus. Again, there's more begging. They're just asking him, will you please help? And what does Jesus do? And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he, that is Jesus, put his fingers into his ears, and after spitting, touched his tongue. And looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. All right. So first up, so Jesus takes him away from the crowd, right? So it's the crowd who brought this guy. They said, please heal him. Jesus then says, hey, come with me. He takes this guy privately, and then it's one of those you wish you could just see acted out. So he puts his fingers in his ears, then he spits, maybe spits on his hand, and then he touches the man's tongue. Quite literally, physically touches. Jesus has no concern for germs at this point. He's doing something else. And so, after doing all of this, he looks up to heaven and says what is in Aramaic, be opened. Okay? So he's trying to open this man's ears and his tongue. We'll come back. Going on, verse 35. And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. And so just like that, after this whole episode, right, pulls him aside, puts his fingers in his ears, he spits, touches his tongue, says be open. All of a sudden this man can hear for the first time, and he can speak plainly. He can talk like everybody else. Now the question is, why did Jesus do all this, right? So for this woman, he just said, hey, your daughter's healed, you can go home. We've seen other healings where somebody touches his robe, or he just speaks. Jesus can work in whatever way he wants. So why is it that he pulls this man out of the crowd, and then he does this whole motions, right? Who is this for? This isn't for other people to see. Jesus doesn't need to touch. Nobody's watching. And yet you think of this man who is, he's noticeable, right? People are aware of this guy, and he's probably been a bit of a kind of a sideshow most of his life. People are like, oh, that guy, have you heard him talk? And I feel bad for him. And so Jesus doesn't do all this in front of the crowd. He doesn't make him a spectacle. He pulls him aside privately, and then he encounters him. He quite literally meets him exactly where this man needs to be met, because his issue physically is that he can't hear and that he can't speak. And so Jesus doesn't just say, all right, you can hear and speak now. He actually physically comes and touches this man's ears and touches his tongue. He comes, and just like this woman, the barrier that so many people would have seen was this cultural barrier, and Jesus calls that out and acknowledges this whole children and dogs metaphor. Now this man has a physical ailment where he has these physical issues, and yet Jesus comes to him and meets him exactly right there. Says, your ears are an issue? Let Jesus touch your ears. Your tongue's an issue? Jesus is going to touch your tongue. And this man is healed. He's released from his speech impediment, and he speaks plainly. There's all of this miraculous healing. And so Jesus comes to these two people in very different ways depending on what they were coming with, what their baggage was, why they would not have been part of the circle, why they would not have been part of the presumably image of God's people. Jesus then with this man, we've talked about this a little bit, and Jesus charged them to tell no one. So he tells this man, hey, don't tell him I did this. Why does Jesus not want to know? We'll find that out at a different sermon. But the more he charged them, so the more he told them, don't talk about me, the more zealously they proclaimed it. It's just like, don't say anything. Like, I'm going to say something. Don't say anything. I'm going to say something. So they're running around there telling people because their life has been changed. They can't help but talk about this man who came, and it was miraculous. And I'd never heard anything. I'd never said anything. And he touched my ears and he touched my tongue, and all of a sudden, my life was forever changed. And so the people there, they were astonished beyond measure, saying, he has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute speak. And so you have this second miraculous encounter. Somebody who approaches, is kind of brought to Jesus. Jesus meets them in their situation and provides healing. Now there's something special about this passage in Mark. I want to go back to the first part of this second story. And so when they brought him this man who was deaf and had a speech impediment. Okay, I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but this speech impediment word, this is in the New Testament's written in Greek. This word shows up 0 other places in the whole New Testament. But it shows up one place in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So this word, if you're a Jew, you've heard it only one place and one place only, and that is in Isaiah 35. And so I want to look at Isaiah 35, because anyone reading this story in Mark would be brought back by this unique and fabulous word. So in verse 4, say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God, and he will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. And then the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute, there's the word, sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. So if you're reading this story, what's this promise? Anxious heart, fear not, be strong, because your God will come. Who has come? God himself in Jesus. And now we're seeing that the lame are walking and the deaf are hearing and the mute are speaking for the first time. But in this crazy twist, right? Because this is the part they're really excited about. Great, all of these healings. And they're also really excited because, God's going to come with vengeance and the recompense of God, right? He's going to save us with this strong and mighty hand. This is a big promise for them. And the twist of Jesus is that the man who would bring this healing would not come bringing vengeance upon other people, but God was going to come and take the world's vengeance upon himself. And the recompense of God, the due payment for all of the sin and tragedy and brokenness in the world that was meant for other people, that other people had coming, God was going to come himself in the form of Jesus and take it upon himself. And it's in that sacrifice, in the pouring of all of that vengeance upon Jesus on the cross, and in the glorious resurrection and triumphing over it, shattering that we have this miraculous healing, that we can say to ourselves when we have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not, because our God has come. Our God is here. And so we see in these two stories that Jesus came and God came, not just for one type or group of people, he came for all. Because if you were, they didn't do this as in Scripture, they didn't have anyone close their eyes and picture what a good follower of God looks like. But I would venture, if you asked most Jews at this time, most people who were looking for the coming Messiah, right, who's going to be on the right side of God when he comes, they would not have told you a Syrophoenician Gentile woman. They would have not have told you this deaf man who is mute. Actually, there's a story where people see somebody who is lame and they ask Jesus, is it because he sinned or his parents sinned, right? Because clearly something's wrong. It's somebody's fault. Those aren't God's people. Those are they've brought this on themselves. And yet Jesus comes, and these are the kind of people he's come for. It's not just one group. It's not just one type. It's not just one image of person. He came for all people. And so as Christians, I don't know what your background is. I don't know if when you were in school, if you felt like you fit in, if you were in the it crowd. I don't know if you felt like you kind of always a misfit or you're kind of even faking it to be in a group. I don't know if at work you feel like I'm a top succeeder, I'm doing great, or if it's kind of like, man, people always overlook me. But there's no way that whatever your story is, that Jesus did not come for you. There is a place in God's family for you at all times. To follow him, to declare him as Lord, and to believe that this promise that Jesus came was not just for somebody else. This wasn't just for that group of people who have their life together, that group of people who know all the answers, but that Jesus came for you. And so as Christians now, we get to continue to proclaim this message. And one of the challenges we face is that sometimes when you become part of a group, it can be really easy to forget where you came from, right? And especially if you're like me, I'm a lifelong Christian. I was born and baptized and raised in the church. Sometimes it's easy for me to overlook the fact that without God, I would not be in his church. I would not be in his family. I was in a leadership organization in high school and college, and there was kind of a leadership structure that had two tiers to it. And they worked together, but they were also kind of their own things. And at 1 year, I got to serve in the second tier of leadership. And I remember at that time, there was some efforts to take those two tiers of leadership and put some more space, kind of put more of the responsibility on the top tier, less on the second tier. It's not right or wrong, but that was the effort. And a lot of those of us in the second tier of leadership, we were like, this is not right, because we're just as good as them, right? We're one big team, and so we fought and we talked about all of these things and how we really should close the gap, and these are more similar than different. Well, then the next year, me and a couple other people who were in that second tier, we got to serve in the top tier. And then when people proposed, hey, what if we lengthen the gap between the two tiers of leadership? Like, that's not a bad idea. Right? Looks pretty nice when you're on top. And you think of how many times, I mean, this is in like every movie. I always think of like Mean Girls, where you have, you see like the it crowd in school and you want to be in it, but you kind of hate them. But then once you're in it, you're like, oh, this is fine. Like this, this is a good way to structure things. It's really easy to rejoice as Christians that we are beggars and that we are sinners and that we have been saved by God. Man, it's nothing of my own, and God loves me even when I'm at my most broken. But then as Christians to look at other people and be like, oh, you're not really Christian material. You don't really fit my picture. So I want to tell you about somebody who changed my picture of what a Christian is. So as some of you know, as part of my seminary experience, I have a one-year internship, pastoral internship. We're not quite a pastor, but I'm doing some pastor stuff. And it was actually over in Lakewood, Colorado at Bethlehem Lutheran Church. Great church. And on Thursday nights at Bethlehem, they have a homeless service where they offer a bunch of needs like showers and laundry and a meal. And then after all of this, they have a worship service. And I, as my pastoral intern, I got to help out with this a lot. And whenever I saw new people, I'd always go greet them. And so there's one Thursday night that I'm kind of waiting for service to start. We're getting closer to when the worship's going to begin, and I'm going to preach that night. And I see somebody walking I've never seen before, and he's got this limp and this long, shaggy hair, and he's got a very large hole in the kind of middle of his pants, and looks pretty rugged. And I see him, and I go over, and I sit next to him, and I talk to him. I say, hey, PJ, it's nice to meet you. What's your name? And I find out that he's from Scotland, so he has a Scottish accent. And so what I hear, I ask him his name, and he says, Dodal McKenzie. And I was like, did you say Dodal? Dodal McKenzie. I was like, all right, nice to meet you, Dodal. And so I'm talking to him, and I'm calling him Dodal. And at one point I introduced him to somebody else. I'm like, hey, Mac, come meet Dodal. He's like, Dodal, how do you spell your name? And he's like, Donald. I was like, oh, Donald, okay. Sorry, Donald, I mean Dodal, I mean Donald. But I'm talking to Dodal, or Donald, and he's telling me all of this stuff about his background, and he feels way too comfortable for me talking about, like, so he had a near gun wound, which is why there's a hole in the middle of his pants, and he was way too graphic in describing how close it could have been to some issues, and I was just like, man, this guy, he's just, in my head, he's quite a character, and we're talking some more, and one of the unique things about him is every so often he would kind of look up, and then he would say a number, and the number kept getting smaller. So he would be talking, and he'd look up, and he'd be like, 30. And then he'd keep talking. I was like, what? And we're talking a little bit longer, and he's like, 22. And I was like, at one point, I'm like, all right, Donald, like, what's going on, man? Why are you counting down? And was something happening? And so I asked him, like, what are you doing? What are these numbers? And he looks at me, and he says, I'm counting down until I get to hear the word of God. I was just floored. Because Donald was not my picture of what a faithful follower of Christ looked like. And in that moment, he shattered it. And so as I was thinking about this message and thinking about looking at people who don't always fit in our picture, in our bubble, I came across this quote by a pastor who grew up in modern-day Sri Lanka, became an evangelist. He says, evangelism is witness. It is one beggar telling another beggar where to get food. The Christian does not offer out of his bounty. He has no bounty. He simply guests at his he is simply a guest at his master's table, and as evangelist, he calls others too. We are all simply beggars who have been received, and we're just telling other people, hey, man, I found food. I found life. This all makes sense, and this has given me hope. I just got to tell you where this is so you can have it too. It's not because I'm great, because I'm in the it crowd. It's just, I don't belong at this table. I'm a beggar just like you. I got to show you this. I think it's such a beautiful image. And so as we think about our lives, as we go about it, this is just a call to open our eyes. Who is it that we encounter that maybe doesn't strike us as Christian material? Maybe because they're apathetic, they have different interests than us. Maybe they're pretty antagonistic. Who is it that we can just witness to, just point to and see with eyes like Jesus, that this is maybe somebody who needs to encounter Jesus too? And with that, I just want to point out that as humans, this is normal. We gravitate towards people who have common interests, who are like us, right? It's fine. It's usually when we talk to people, we try and see if we have something in common. But sometimes what happens is, over time, we kind of only surround ourselves with people who think and act and believe like us. And so it can become really hard to encounter people who are different. And so I want to point something out about the first story we read about Jesus and this woman, because I've shown a map like this before. This is Jerusalem. This is the holy city. This is Galilee. So this is where Jesus is doing most of his ministry from. So most of the Jewish population, most of the people Jesus is ministering to are up here. Do you know where this woman was? Tyre and Sidon. That's up here. Jesus, this was not an accidental encounter. Jesus left. Where's the Messiah coming? He's coming here. Yeah, but he's also going over there. And so sometimes we need to realize to reach people that you otherwise might not reach, you need to be in spaces that you otherwise might not be in. Now, there is certainly a place, the people that God has put, your family, your friends, your circle, your coworkers, those are people that we're called to be a blessing to as well. At the same time, if we only ever go into spaces where people think, act, and believe like us, then there are a whole lot of people who don't match our image who are not going to get to hear about the good news. Other people who don't know where that king's table is. And so, brothers and sisters, as we close, I just want to let you know that no matter what you've gone through, no matter where you've been, there is a place at Jesus' family for you. That he has come for you without a doubt. And I hope that we can continue as a church and as Christians, find people who don't yet know, who need to know that there's a place for them as well. May that be our goal this week and forevermore. In Jesus' name, amen.